Thank you, everybody, for coming. This talk is called A Pair Program for 30,000 Hours, Ask Me Anything. I'm Joe Moore. I work for Pivotal Labs, which, if you were at the keynote earlier, you might have heard is the consulting division of Pivotal organization. We work with clients to build software with them. We don't build software for them, we build software with them. Let's see. It's Pivotal Labs. It's kind of cool, actually. Ansi accidentally promoted my talk maybe a little bit. I don't know. Because he talked quite a bit about pair programming. And then these two guys are actually doing, I guess you should argue, a form of pair programming, even if it was a bit scripted. And there was maybe just a little bit more sort of scripted tension between them than is maybe hopefully normal. This is a Q&A session. So I want everybody here to also share your experiences too. It doesn't just have to be me. I may even call on a few people who I know might know a thing or two about pair programming, and whom I think might be able to answer the question even better than me or differently than me. Almost all talks have that moment where either the speaker asks a question, says, hey, does anybody know the answer to this? Or raise your hand if you've done this. Or somebody asks a question and there's usually sort of it's a little bit awkward. It's like, is anybody going to answer that? Is somebody going to say something? This session is only that. It's only that. So the level of awkwardness is dependent entirely on your willingness to ask questions. And I guess my promise to answer as honestly as I possibly can. I have done a lot of pair programming. I came up with the 30,000 hour number, sort of napkin calculations, saying that I've pair programmed basically every working day since the year 2000 or so. So it's in the ballpark, right? But anyway, I have done it a lot, but there's no canonical right answer to anything necessarily, especially when it comes to people interactions. So I can only promise you that I will answer as honestly as I possibly can. If I feel like I don't have an answer, I won't make one up. I will tell you honestly that I don't have any answers. And if there's anybody here who hears a question and feels like they would love to answer that question, I encourage you, please do so. And I even have a microphone here. I will promise to repeat your questions after you ask them. So let's start with what is pair programming. Is there anybody who does not know what pair programming is? All right, 0 people. Is there anybody who has pair programmed ever, even once? 75, 80% maybe. Who pair programs somewhat regularly? You decide what somewhat regularly means. Maybe 10% or so. Okay, so for those who maybe want to hear what I think pair programming is a software development discipline or technique by which 2 programmers work on the same software problem, solve the same software problem at the same time using the same computer. And if you were to throw the word remote, like if these 2 people are, say, distributed, not in the same room together, then you can have remote pair programming as well, by which you do the same thing, just using some sort of remote collaboration technologies, screen sharing, video chat, and things like that. So what are some of the pair programming benefits? There's a whole wall of text that I put up here, and there's even more than this. There's everything from having a continuous code review. 2 people collaborating tends to produce fewer bugs. It's continuous cross-training. It's new, say, junior developers learning from senior developers. It's senior developers learning new things from junior developers. There's often better factored code because there's multiple people who are all deciding upon the design of the code, the modularity of the code, the factoredness of the code. And a million other benefits, and I'm sure many of you may come up with even more than what is on this page right now. What are some of the challenges of pair programming? So there's a whole wall of text of these too. There's pair programming is not a silver bullet. It's not going to, it's a tool in the Agile software development toolbox. And it may not be for everybody. And there's many, many challenges. It's exhausting. It's intense. It's a continuous social interaction while you're doing pair programming. You may not like your pair. You may like your pair too much. It's, like I said, a continuous social interaction. People might be shy. You might have arguments. And so there's other challenges as well. I happen to believe, and I think most of us at Pivotal Labs believe, and also Cloud Foundry and the other Pivotal divisions, believe that even though pair programming has a lot of challenges, it's worth it. The benefits far outweigh the challenges, and most of the challenges are overcomable. You can get over shyness, you can get over social awkwardness, you can take showers more often, and such. All right, so I thought I'd go ahead and take care of the most common question. I get this every time, so let's just knock that one out right away. When do you go to the bathroom? The answer is you go to the bathroom or take any sort of break whenever you feel like you need to. It's perfectly fine and encouraged to be vocal and assertive, to say, hey, I think we need a break. And in fact, I would say pair programming being as intense and exhausting as it can be, I actually encourage people to take breaks very regularly. Go get a coffee, go use the facilities, go play ping pong, go make a phone call. And some people will even set up a timer. Have a little timer going that says every 30 minutes, every 50 minutes, every hour, take a 10-minute break just to stretch your legs. Sometimes people will set up a timer and take a 1-minute break just to sort of stretch your arms, look at something else. But definitely take breaks and use the facilities whenever you feel like you need to. All right. So with that, I encourage anyone who might have a question about pair programming to ask me anything. And in fact, before you do, you might already have a question in your head. And there's a very good chance that the question you have is going to be one of the first 3 questions that are going to be asked, in my experience. So I encourage you, even if you have a question in your head, to think of another question just in case the one is about to get asked. So fire away. I will repeat your questions. And like I said, anybody who has experienced pair programming, even if you've only paired once, please feel free to share your experiences when you hear people's questions. All right, fire away. Who's going to be first? Yes, in the back.
So if you've never pair programmed at all, can you give us some hints or clues about what's the first things that you should do, like introducing yourself to your pair or whatever? Getting started.
Sure, getting started pairing for the very first time ever. That's a great question. I think a great way to start is along the lines of what you just said, which is being honest about the fact that you've never paired. I actually feel that even the first time I pair with somebody, I'm remote full-time. So when I pair with people for the first time, it's very often we're going to remote pair for the first time. And people may be experienced in pair programming. They might never have remote paired, which is a somewhat analogous situation. So I actually encourage people to be honest about the fact that they've never paired, and to say, hey, I've never paired before. You can even say, I'm a little nervous about it. I don't really know how this works. With any luck, somebody else, the person you're about to pair with, has had some experience, and it sort of like sets the. I feel like it sort of set a tone of both of you being extra mindful of what you might call pairing etiquette. We have this sort of phrase, pairing etiquette. And that's things like being extra courteous when maybe the other person is coding and you can see that they're stuck and you'd like to take over and maybe finish that function or whatever, or find that thing they're struggling to find. Pairing etiquette is doing things like saying, do you mind if I drive for a second? Can I help you with that? Do you mind if I take control? Those little verbal cues, rather than just grabbing the mouse and taking over and such. And so I think being honest about the fact that you've never paired before can kind of set the tone to kind of amp up or be extra cognizant of that sort of, you might say, formality or etiquette. And if you're using something like a discipline like test-driven development, I find that pairing and TDD really go hand in hand because they can, test-driven development, for those who don't know, is an agile software development practice by which the developers will write a test using a testing framework for functionality that they wish they had but does not exist. And when they run the test, it'll fail because they haven't written the code yet. And then they'll write the code, the simplest code that can make that code, that make that functionality pass. And then run the test, and the test passes. So doing something like what's called ping pong pairing, and that's where sort of a semi-rigid structure by which one developer will write the failing test, and then the other pair, the other side of the pair, will implement the code and make it pass. And then that second person writes a failing test. And then the first person writes the code that make it pass. And you go back and forth this way. And so this is another way in which you could sort of put some structure around a pairing situation. And that could be very handy when it's your first time pairing. I'll maybe tangent on that a little bit. I know I'm rambling on to your question, but I feel like related to that might be, well, what if, what do you do if maybe somebody is driving too much? Maybe it's your first time pairing and the other person is just not giving you a way to get in and contribute at all. Asking to do ping pong pairing could be a way of rebalancing the pair so that you're both getting a chance to drive and sort of putting that structure in that you might need. Yes?
How do you minimize, or what do you use in particular to minimize the penalty of context switching?
Could you repeat that? To what was it about context switching?
Yeah, I find that when we switch up pairs basically every day, and there can be a fair amount of knowledge that you have to sort of reacquire every single time you switch pairs and work on something slightly different.
Sure. So the question was around switching pairs. When do you switch pairs? How do you minimize or deal with context switching? For example, it sounds like your group pairs, and you might have a rule by which you switch every day. I think that's a great general rule, but I'll preface that. That way you don't have people, maybe you have a team of 4, 6, 8 or more people, and you can switch pairs around, and that's great. I encourage that. But that can be painful, as you pointed out. Maybe you're just getting you've just barely understood that really hard concept that is some tricky bit of the system, and now you have to switch. And at the end of the day, you kind of barely understand that, and now you're switching again. And your question was about minimizing that context, the pain of that context switch. And with that, I would say, having a rule like switching every day, I would consider it more of a guideline. And because we have that general guideline too. Every day we should probably switch. But we'll usually ask during our morning stand-up, are there any pairs who need to stick together? And there may be somebody who volunteers and says, I'd really like to stick because I've just barely got this context and I really want to see this story, feature, card, ticket done. Or at least get to a point to where they feel like they've got the context that, more of that context that they feel they're really looking for. And I think that that's great. When we're ramping up new developers or developers who are, say, new to the project, we'll often have that new developer stick with the same pair and on the same, we call them stories, feature, until it's done, so that they can kind of get the whole arc, so to speak, of it. The beginning of it, that tough part in the middle that they're really struggling with, and then hopefully finally the completion and the commits that make that commit done, and hopefully wrap up that context. So I think that that's totally fine, and that having a super rigid structure by which you have to switch is not necessarily needed. But I've definitely seen it where teams take that too far, and pairs stick for days on end. So with the way we tend to break up work, it's very common that we can finish up a chunk of committable, deliverable work in a day or two. And that's just the art of like how you break up work, and that's kind of another topic. But it's definitely been the case where pairs have said, on the second day, we'd really like to stick, we're almost done with this thing. On the third day, we'd really like to stick, we're almost done. Fourth day, totally swear you guys, we're really super almost done. And that's usually the time at which even often somebody in the pair will say, this thing has gotten out of control, we thought it was this big, it's actually this big. We should swap up to get a fresh set of eyes in there. So even though we don't have necessarily a strict structure by which you have to robotically, systematically switch, we also don't let everybody just pair with whomever you like for as long as you like. So there's a balance there. Yes?
So in this case, how do you track like the feature, like the feature uses to track this? Do you assign for both, or like you keep switching onto the game? How do you kind of collaborate on that?
Sure. So the question was about if we're switching almost every day, how do we track who's working on what? Especially if you have pairs. How do you assign work to pairs, track work with pairs? And it is the case where we will, if we have a longer running feature, maybe it's taking 2, 3, 4 days to get something done, and we switch people up, how do you track that switch? So some tools have support for that. I guess I'll plug Pivotal Tracker. We have a tool called Pivotal Tracker. It's a Agile software project tracking tool, management tool. And it supports assigning multiple people to we call them stories, story, bug, feature, what have you. So some tools support that. I'm sure that there are others that do as well. You can do things in your Git commit whereby you sort of attribute the commit to multiple people, and there's some tools that do that. Git Duet. So somebody back here just mentioned Git Duet. There's another, we have some open source scripts called Git Pair. It's very similar to Duet. Some people use Duet, some people internally use Git Pair. They do basically the same thing. So I definitely encourage you to look up Git Duet because it lets you attribute, at least you could attribute 2, 3, 4, 5 people to a Git commit if you would like. I would say that I know that for some organizations, it's very important for them, for their own reasons, that they track very closely who is working on what and for how long, for metrics reasons and such. We don't have that. Like the thing I just described about Pivotal Tracker and allowing you to assign multiple people to a piece of work, that's more just for communication purposes. Hey, who's working on this thing? Oh, it's Joe and Alex. Okay, cool. I've got a question about it. I'm going to go ask Joe and Alex. Other organizations use that information to harvest metrics out of for a variety of reasons. And that's just not our use case. So if you have that use case, you may have to dig deeper for something that tracks, or gives up that sort of attribution data for whatever purposes that you need to track it for. Yes?
So how do you convince a manager that you don't lose productivity per programming? Because, okay, I'm not really experienced in pair programming, but the times that I did it, my feeling was that actually the code quality was improving, and that the knowledge was shared. That's a big problem when you have just one single person working on a single part of the code base. It's complicated, right? But then, if you have a group of 10 people, then suggesting to put them pair programming is like having in half the resources. And so who's not experienced, like, well, who doesn't have the right taste on what it means to have a problem in the code structure in the long run that cuts your productivity, but in the long run, it's really tough, right? So how would you propose or suggest to a manager to introduce pair programming? Correct, right?
Well, this is the big question. I'll probably mention a bunch of stuff. I may even call on some people who, sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. I did not repeat the question. Yes, the big question, which I will not repeat. You'll have to guess. Pardon me. Through context clues. The question was, how do you convince a manager or maybe your boss, your budgeting department, basically, how do you convince people who might be sort of in charge to try something like pair programming, not just for, say, one pair, but maybe you have a team of 10, a dozen more people. And I feel like that is the really big question. I feel like there's a lot of techniques, there's a lot of answers, and I'm going to go over some of those. And if some people who are, I would almost like to tangent that a little bit into how to, if you're basically trying to sell it in some way, sell it to your manager, sell it to a proposed client, sell it to some division head or something like that. And if they're willing, I know there's some people in the back who are actually more on the sales side, like their job is to sort of sell, not just pair programming, but all the Agile disciplines to people who might be very skeptical, never heard of it, or have heard of it and feel like it is the biggest scam ever heard of. Especially from a consulting company. Oh, you'd like us to pay double for half this many people? Oh, that's a great. Sure. How much money do you want? Why not charge me triple? How about quadruple? Why not? So after I talk a bit, is there anybody back there who'd be willing to maybe field a bit of that question? Okay, great. Thanks, Simon. So I'll take a stab at a couple things. One is to talk about all of those benefits we just talked about. There's the short-term gains. There's the short-term gains. Hey, we just shared some knowledge right now. We just fixed this bug right now. There are some short-term gains that are harder to quantify. Hey, look, we didn't introduce a bug just now. Hey, look, we just made our code more modular, making it easier to change later, because 2 people, or as you're switching 4 people, you're switching 8 people have all helped design this. If you're making a switch, so if you are in a current software development structure where you don't pair, and you have metrics for your velocity, I'll start out words, your velocity or how much stuff you get done, how many bugs per release, how many QA cycles you have to go through, how many times a story is rejected or you have to do rework and such. It's actually a great opportunity, if your manager is willing to try it, to put in pairing and do those same measurements. I'm confident that you will see benefits on those metrics. You'll see fewer bugs. You'll see actually a quicker time to delivery, because you are you're writing better code. You're introducing fewer bugs. You're making better factored code. As people switch, they're not slowed down by the context switch because they're getting the knowledge as they're going. So I'm confident that you're going to see better numbers if this person is numbers driven. And that gets into a little bit broader view of asking the question of what does done mean? Meaning, I'm willing to bet if before we ever talked about this, I asked everybody, hey, write down, to do a quick sketch of what your software development process looks like. Going from, say, idea inception, earlier in the keynotes, we saw a lot of the light bulb is the idea, and then there's the circle, right? What does your circle look like? Probably something kind of like that. There's this idea, and then there's maybe some research, and then there's some product definition stuff, and then you do some development, and then you go through maybe you have a QA cycle, and there's things that happen, and then finally there's a feature of some kind being released into production. It's live, it's getting whatever your production means. Customers, clients, your internal users are using it. And so there's I'll do it from here to there's the idea, and then there's done. And somewhere in the middle, if you're to circle it, is the part where you put fingers on the keyboard and you do some typing. And then you take your fingers off the keyboard and you're kind of done. And then you get into the QA cycles and stuff like that and the rework and all that. And that's if you're doing this much development from idea to delivery, some amount in there is fingers on the keyboard. I think everybody would agree that, even this manager you described. In my experience, You say the words pair programming, and they say, oh, that programming part? Oh, that's the whole, that's like you're good, it's going to be doubled, because that's what done software is. But it's not. So if you could take that rework cycle, the QA cycles, the getting the business requirements wrong, all that, if you could compress and reduce that part of the development cycle, you actually reduce your time to market, your time to delivery. So that's a story you could try to tell. And it might bounce right off. No. 1 + 1 = 2. That math is just too easy. So it's going to cost double. And there are some empirical studies that are out there that show that pair programming does not slow down your delivery. It actually increases it. It may quote unquote, slow down or extend the amount of time of the fingers on the keyboard typing, fingers off the keyboard, done typing, kind of. It might extend that amount of time, but the payoff is this, again, that compression, the lack of all that other stuff that comes after that, all the extra work because of all those benefits we saw about pair programming. You can try that, and that might bounce off too. Any of these might help. And if you say it with, Alex put it well earlier, with conviction and honesty, and really try to convince them that you don't just want to play with your friend all day. This isn't something you're making up. This really has benefits. But what I find is the only thing that will really work over time is you have to have them make a leap of faith and say, trust us. We're going to try this. We're going to measure it. We're going to give it a try. You have to, like management, you have to give us enough time. And there's like maybe a discussion about how much time is enough. You have to give us enough time to implement this and show you the benefit. We promise we're not making this up. You're going to see this benefit. It's not going to be twice as much. It's not going to be all this. It's going to be these great benefits. You're going to see it. And if you trust us to do this, then it will pay off. Like you give us that trust, we promise to deliver on that trust. And that might be the clincher. And if not even that works, well, now there's a whole nother topic to be discussed. What's that? Change company. Yeah, like I'm not going to get into that topic, but like then you're getting into like the trust amongst your teams and all that, and that's a whole other topic. So that I hope that helps. Like I said, there's no silver bullet. If there had been 150 years worth of empirical evidence that showed that this worked, then we wouldn't be having this discussion right now. I don't know if anybody who is more on the sales side of Pivotal Labs trying to sell this idea to clients. If you feel like you have something more to contribute, I'm going to hand you a microphone. You can contribute. If not, just give me a wave and you can tell me that I did fine.
I guess all I would say is that
Hold on. Just
benefits that Joe's talking about. Sure.
maybe you can introduce yourself too.
Sure. My name is Simon. I'm the director of Pivotal Labs in Boston. And as Joe mentioned, I do a fair amount of selling of pair programming and all of the other practices that Pivotal Labs has. I think that the benefits that Joe's talking about, they're trying to address problems that all organizations have, and organizations solve them in different ways just without pair programming, right? So the organization might have a challenge where they want kind of other engineers to be able to kind of read and access code that was written by other programmers, and they have code reviews to try and do that. And so they invest time in code reviews, and they want managers or kind of more experienced developers reading code from less experienced developers. So there's a big kind of like time investment there that pairing addresses by just saying we're going to do that all the time. Right, so that right there, you've kind of said like we're just shifting time that the organization is investing in code reviews, and we're kind of building it into our regular rhythm. There's similarly time in terms of ramp up of onboarding new engineers to a project, and organizations try and address that by, writing a lot of documentation for that project, or, having, team members like spend time kind of like just doing onboarding activities, learning a code base before they start contributing to it. And that's time that we just bake into kind of the regular day, right? Like that's just part of pairing, is that we're constantly trying to pass context as we're rotating from, working on one feature, starting to pair with another person. You have to pass a lot of that context. So instead of investing a lot of time in documentation, we're investing that time just in the act of pairing, right? There's similarly kind of like time investments that organizations make in terms of teaching, new skills to engineers, right? And so you might kind of invest in sending some engineers to go and learn some new technologies, spend that time learning the technologies, then come back to a project and be able to contribute. And that's also something that pairing kind of has a benefit that's just baked into the activity of delivering features. You can transfer knowledge really effectively about new technologies from one engineer to another, from an experienced engineer to a junior engineer, or from an engineer who has, just been working on some, new database, and they want to kind of pass that to some other engineers. You can pass that. And the last one is that organizations try and spread knowledge through their organization, through their engineering teams in lots of different ways. And that's something that I think we've at Lab seen a lot of larger enterprises struggle with, is like, how do you kind of like make sure that, some team that's building some, shared code that might be usable on a different project, how do they know about that? And so we invest in kind of systems of kind of like, documenting like shared services that are available. One of the ways that we can handle that through pairing is by rotating people not only within a team, but across teams. And so that's another like kind of just built into the act of pairing, you can kind of make that transfer of knowledge across teams much more efficient. And so, I think like part of the selling of it is shifting, look, you're investing in all of these things that we think are benefits already, and pairing is just a different kind of mode that addresses those same concerns.
Thank you, Simon. Good question. Who else has a question? Yes, go ahead.
When you pair program, do you try to get to know your partner better, or do you strictly keep it professional?
Oh, interesting question. So
Is there value to like build camaraderie?
actually, yeah. Do you try to get to know your pair better personally and the camaraderie, or do you try to keep a strict professional wall, perhaps, between you? So we like to say that we hire for empathy, and we hire for empathy, we hire for cultural fit, and for ability to learn, and for rather than say skills and such. So kind of built into that is our philosophy of yes, absolutely. That's one of the most powerful things about pair programming, is the empathy and the camaraderie that you build with your pair. And that can go a lot of different ways, and I've had it go many different ways for me. Some of the people I've paired with have become some of my best friends. Some of the people that I've paired with are people that personally I just don't click with, say. Everybody's personalities are different. But by pairing with them, they could be that person I didn't really know very well and didn't like or something. But by pairing with them, I got to know where they're coming from. Maybe a little bit more why why we don't click, why our personalities are different. And you can build up that empathy. We use that word a lot, of like putting yourself in their shoes. Do I understand where they're coming from? I might not agree, but can I understand? And so that's super important to what we do, because we want to have a collaborative group of people who are good people who are going to be good to each other, just humans being good to each other. And there's not necessarily anything strictly wrong about keeping everybody has that different line. how much you share. I think we've all been around people who we feel like maybe in the workplace share too much. And there's always those people who I always wish I could get to know that person, but they just can't get past, that wall that they put up. So there's some balance there, but I guess in short, I always want to get to know my coworkers better. And I like those little breaks we were talking about earlier. I talked about, bathroom breaks and such. Sometimes the breaks that we take introduce themselves naturally. We're doing some long running thing. Maybe we're waiting for something, or we decided to take a short break where we're not going to step away from the computer. And we'll have to take that opportunity to just have a casual conversation about something, get to know. Oh, hey, where are you from? Oh, what'd you do this weekend? Oh, did you go see that movie? Is it good? Just building that camaraderie, being people working together rather than, robots or resources working together. So yeah, definitely, it's a big priority for us. Go ahead. Yes, go ahead.
So one question is, you mentioned before that sometimes you can split the task. So what you mean by that is that two people are working independently, or is because I see that people say that they're really pairing, but it's more like that scenario. They have the same task, they break that into tasks, and then each one addresses that. So is that something that should be done, or we should always do like pairing, like only one computer, one task at a time? Can you also talk a little bit?
Sure. The question was about maybe different ways of pairing, or if two people are, say, working on the same different parts of the same task. Maybe there's a back-end component and a front-end component, and one person does one part and the other person does the other. Is that pairing, or is that a good way to pair, quote unquote good? Do I advocate for that and such? So at Pivotal Labs, I'll tell you my perspective and the way that we work. So if you were to walk into one of our offices, you would not see a pair split up working on two different computers on two different related tasks, or two halves of the same story or something like that, front and back end, for example. You wouldn't see that. Because it's our personal philosophy, and sort of related, is that we want people to be full stack developers. But more than anything, we want people to be continuously learning from each other. So if two people are, say, figured out a way of splitting some task in some way, and they're both working independently on it, they may have something where at the end they try to teach each other about it or something like that, but they're creating their little mini knowledge silo by doing that. They're not collaborating as well as they could, probably. Whatever. There's always exceptions. But in the most common scenario of like, oh, how about if you do this part and I'll do that part? They're still very much at risk at introducing those bugs, getting stuck on those little things, getting stuck on those big things, all those things that pairing is supposed to deal with. They've sort of reintroduced them, at least to an extent. Maybe they're talking all the time or something like that, but they've still reduced the effectiveness of pairing by doing that split. And so we don't do that. Am I going to say, oh, you should never do that? I'm not going to say authoritatively, absolutely not. There may be scenarios where that is somewhat appropriate, but I would always question why. And I feel like that sort of feeds into maybe a related topic that you made me think of, which is when you choose not to pair, and are people being honest about why they're not pairing? And I've definitely experienced situations where, because I know the person, this happens especially with people who might be new to pairing, they're maybe a little still unsure, still trying to get the hang of it, where there's always an excuse to not pair. Oh, I'm going to go look up that thing. Hey, I'll do that research. Oh, while you work on this, I'll work on that. Hey, we're still pairing, right? But there's always an excuse to not pair. And I find that while there are certainly valid excuses why two people might decide, let's split this up for reason X, Y, Z, often the reason is actually that the person just doesn't really want to pair. And so that's what I would look out for more than anything. If the two people are honest about why they're splitting something up, and maybe they've asked, asked another pair about it. Hey, we're going to split this thing up. What do you think about that? And if the other people say like, yeah, that sounds totally valid, you're right, pairing on that just doesn't seem to make sense, maybe there's some reason, then sure. But if you ask some other people on the team and they're like, why aren't you pairing on that? Actually, we'll have that scenario. Sometimes we'll have scenarios where people aren't pairing for some reason. Somebody usually pipes up, hey guys, why aren't you pairing? Sort of, challenging them a little bit, like, hey, what's going on over there? Because it's so odd to see two people not pairing. And sometimes that prompts them to get back together. Sometimes they're like, oh, for these 3 reasons, and that's fine. But, again, I would question the why and make sure that it's a truly valid for the engineering reason that they've chosen not to pair versus somebody maybe just being trepidatious about pairing, they're just tired of pairing for the day. They're wiped out. That might be a valid reason. I'm wiped out. I just can't do it. I need this last hour just to do my own thing. That's a discussion to be had. But if people are making up reasons not to pair, then that's something to watch out for.
I think one follow-up question
Sure.
would be maybe on the distributed system scenario. Can you elaborate also on that case? Do you have any experience there?
Distributed pairing, or distributed. I guess the question I have is, are you talking about like remote people pairing together, or like distributed systems remote pairing? Sure. So I have a lot of experience remote pairing. So the question was about what happens if people aren't necessarily side by side, and it can work extremely well. I am biased to say this. I will preface that. I work full time doing remote pairing. I don't very often sit next to my pair. So take this with a grain of salt. I also have some talks you can look up online about remote pair programming. And I run a website called remotepairprogramming.com. So I'm easily the most biased person in the room to answer this question. It works great. But seriously, in my experience, it really can work great. And I've done this since the year 2010, full time. So it can work great. It's a lot of work. And by that I mean, I and the teams that I work with at Pivotal Labs, and clients too, who have worked with me in this way, have put a lot of work into making the distributed pairing, the remote pairing, as seamless as possible. Like what I like to say is like, my goal is to make the distance disappear. I want it to be like I'm right there, and what can I do to make that distance disappear? How can I make it even less obvious that I'm remote? It always makes me feel good when I remote pair with somebody, especially with the first time. The first time I remote pair with somebody, they're almost always nervous if it's their first time remote pairing. Like, this is weird. I'm going to be on a headphone. You're going to be on video. The mouse is going to be moving on its own. This is odd. And I can honestly say, even though I'm biased, that it is very often the case that at the end of the day, I'll ask them, hey, how did that go? How'd the remote pairing go? And they'll almost always will say, I totally forgot that you were remote. And that's a testimony, not just to me, yes, I guess, but to them too, because that means they were invested in it, right? They were not constant being like, oh, but you're remote, or, oh, I'm going to turn off the video, or I'm going to do something else that makes it somehow disrupts the pairing scenario or something like that. So it can work really well if you invest the time and energy into having good video, having good audio, having good screen sharing, and all that kind of stuff. And there are really hard scenarios. I usually will get asked, what do you do if somebody is 12 time zones away or 5 time zones away? What do you do about time zones? And time zones are really hard. They're about the only thing that technology cannot solve time zones. It can make everything fast. It can make the communication between those 2 time zones really, really fast. But it can't make the time zone go away. And that is a really hard problem to have. So if you have that problem, you could try to pair during the overlapping times. You can have people try to shift their time. There's a bunch of strategies there, but it is really hard. We can dive deeper into that if we want to, maybe at the end if we have time. But like I said, if you're willing to put in the time and effort to making remote pairing work, and getting the technologies working, all that kind of stuff, then it absolutely can work. And like I said, you can look up those resources I described. How about over here?
Yeah, so I have a question. During your guys' hiring process, do you have any effective tests for empathy?
Ooh, that's a great question. During our hiring process, do we have tests for empathy? The answer is yes, absolutely. So we have like a screening process that has built into it some empathy tests that we're sort of, those of us who do the screening process are sort of trained to watch out for. But I guess the best way to describe it is, well, what is our hiring process? So we have like the screening part. This is for engineers anyway. It's slightly different, but similar, but different for, say, designers and product managers. But our interview process is, by the time you say get into the building and are interviewing, is, hey, sit with this team and work with them for a day. That's our hiring process. Sit down and pair for a day with a team, maybe two teams. Sometimes we'll switch it up at lunch. Sometimes not. Sometimes we need a full day. Sometimes we don't. It kind of depends on the situation. If anybody interviews with labs and you don't know, and you only pair for half of the day and not the full day, don't read anything into that. There's a lot of factors, so don't let me imply anything by that. But the point I'm trying to make is that the interview is pairing, and built into that is the person anybody would be pairing with is it's going to be empathy all day long. It's, hey, do I know you? Can I talk to you? Do I feel like sitting next to you? Do you feel like sitting next to me? And like, I'm not trying to sell labs necessarily, but I'm just trying to describe that this is what people go through. And it's not just so we can see, oh, does this person have empathy? Do they act like this or do that, or what do they know? It's as much us interviewing them as them interviewing us. Because pair programming is not necessarily for everybody. You may have come to my talk and got really inspired. Oh, this sounds awesome. I totally want to pair. You watch some talks and like read some stuff in books. This is awesome. And then you just get hired at some place and you sign on the paper and you don't actually pair. And then you sit down that first day and you do it for 8 hours and you're like, this is the worst. What did I do? We don't want that scenario. We want people to come in and really experience what it's like. If we have some planning meeting that day, come along. Oh, we've got some call with a client, come along. This is what it means to work here. So I encourage any of you who might be in an environment where you pair or where you start to pair. Maybe you have a team that is starting to pair and you're also hiring or having people transfer into your division or something like that. You, over here on the side, you convince your manager you're going to have your team pair. And let's say it's successful and some people want to transfer in. I definitely encourage you to not just say yes automatically, and certainly if you can influence this, don't try to avoid having, say, managers or allocators or whatever you call them at your place. Just say, oh, hey, Bob's going to start on your team on Monday. Okay, thanks, bye. Well, Bob may, one, not know you guys pair. He may have heard about it and thinks it's a terrible idea. He may have heard about it and thinks it's a great idea, but hasn't actually done it. So I would definitely encourage anybody who's going to do pairing, and you're going to have people joining your team, whether from the outside or inside, have them try it out for a day or two or a week if you have that luxury, if they're internal, and let them self-select themselves in. Because some of the worst scenarios I've ever seen for engineers at companies is when people were forced to pair. That is a tough scenario. And sometimes they come around eventually. And sometimes and sometimes they don't. It's always incredibly disruptive. And I feel really bad for them. It's like they didn't sign up for this and they're being forced to do this thing. And nobody wants to be forced to do something. Yes, in the green.
From like a performance management standpoint, how are you as an individual assessed if you're primarily pairing?
It's a great question. How are we assessed if we're primarily pairing? The answer is by our peers. We are assessed, I guess you could say, by our pairs. So we have engineering managers, and our engineering managers are always collecting feedback from people who are working with the people who report to them. And we're always looking for kind, kind, specific, and actionable feedback from people, and not just someone who might have once sat next to a person, but someone who's actually really worked with them. Hey, what are they like? Sometimes gathering that feedback is general because you really just are trying to get a general idea for how somebody is performing on a team and interacting with everybody. Sometimes a person has, say, like a individual development plan. Maybe they're doing great in certain areas. Other areas they have some challenges and they need to sort of improve on some things. So you can ask about that kind of stuff. But the short answer is it's by the pairs. It's by the pairs. So which is to maybe like to contrast that with organizations who might try to say, I'll reference a question earlier about attributing code, tracking tickets to people. I know that there are organizations who say like, well, how many tickets were you on this month? How many lines of code did you write? How many tests did you write? Oh, I've got stories about all this stuff, and you don't get me going. I will say this. There was a large software company that we were doing an engagement with, and we did pairing, and it was super successful in this group. And then we disengaged, and over time, some of those people in that group left, and then pairing sort of faltered. And then there was actually like the thing that killed pairing, and that was that their source control management system didn't have a way of very accurately tracking pairs, and they were doing assessments based on how many lines of code people committed. And they couldn't get a good number out of the system, and so they were like, we have to stop pairing. That was so successful because we can't count the K-locks or whatever they called them. So there are reasons why pairing doesn't work in certain organizations. Other questions? Yes, in the back.
So how do you share the role in between pairs? So actually, in my previous experience, I tried to do the pair programming. So with my colleagues. Every single time, I have to start explaining why we have to write this kind of test code. So actually, our code is too legacy. So no detailed specification is existing. So then, my idea is to start writing up some JME code to ensure the quality. So every single time, I have to start explaining my peers, you have to write down this kind of script so you will ensure the quality. So I felt it is really hard to share the role in between pairs. So do you have any tips to set the role for pairs?
So the question was about how it can be hard to share code, maybe taking code that didn't used to be shared and starting to share it through pair programming. And I think maybe related, say, ramping up people on a code base they've never seen before, or having to explain for a code base why things are a certain way, why you use certain techniques, why you like write the test that you write or something like that, and having to do that over and over and over again, and tips around that kind of thing. There's a lot of stuff in there. I feel like, well, on one hand, is there a tip for not having to ramp up somebody on that stuff all the time? Really, if you're switching pairs often, and this is new to them, and I'm kind of trying to read between the lines or infer some things from what you're talking about, and that some of the techniques and testing and such that you're describing, it might not necessarily be common in your organization. Because if they're asking like, oh, why are you testing this like this? Why are you doing X? Why are you doing Y? Then those must be new to those people. Then if you're switching often, there might not be a way of avoiding that. You could try to stick with the same person for a while and build up their expertise. And that way there's two of you who can share the load, so to speak, of that context, that expertise in that system and these techniques and testing technologies or what have you that you're describing that you're having to keep sharing context on. So somebody earlier was talking about the challenges of, say, switching pairs very often. This might be a scenario where you choose, do you have something you want to chime in? Okay, so that's great. This might be a scenario where you want to stick with somebody for long enough, we'll say, to where they get, say, close to your level of expertise and ability to share the load of ramping up other people. So that's one technique you can do. And I'm trying to remember what else you had to say about the other question you had, but maybe I'll take this opportunity to let this gentleman over here chime into the conversation. So please do.
I'd like to hear you talk about goals for the session. I was thinking about that. When I'm focused, I try to set up goals for my own session. I don't pair program, but I believe it to a degree, you know, because I haven't done it. There's all these fears. And, what if I don't like it? It's the same thing as you just went through. But so I think it would be good to have goals. But listening to you, and also in some of my experiences, like for instance, lately I've been surprised at how many people don't know SQL or something like that, right? And because you're working with ORMs all the time. And so to me, you know, the idea of like testing legacy code, writing a script, if each person you have to tell someone that every single time, then to me maybe in an engineering meeting, to bring that up as one of your tenets of how we program in the first place, like see if you can get buy-in by the group, so that it's not a surprise when your partner is trying to explain to you SQL or Java or you know all the things that we may or may not love to do. We're using REST docs, so it's automatically done. So if your engineering group could agree on certain, when your code is done for the session, that it has these certain things, it's tested and you have unit tests and Java docking. If you're calling legacy systems, they're going to test on that. If that's an agreed upon thing, then I think it might be easier to get buy-in from your partner. You know, and then they might teach you something too. One of the tenets they're good at, but you're not. But we have engineering meetings, and we're starting to move more and more towards that because we're starting to see each of us have different strengths and weaknesses, likes and biases. But we all tend to like things a little bit better if we get good at it.
Mhm.
So.
Yeah, that's great. Hopefully everybody could hear that okay. I don't know if it'll be recorded, but we'll just have to go with it. But I really like two things that you brought up. You reminded me of the fact that if you're always having to ramp up, if it's your goal to ramp up people, then, and that can be frustrating, the best way to ramp up somebody on what you're describing is through pairing. So imagine these people, if that you're describing, if they weren't pairing, they were just introduced to the code you're describing, and they weren't pairing with you, just here, go off in the corner with your headphones and figure it out. Well, that person would be in trouble probably. But then you brought up a really good point about if this theme keeps coming, if this theme of people not knowing certain techniques, technologies, testing techniques and such, if the theme is nobody knows these things, then maybe it's worth saying, okay, well, maybe we should agree as a group that, or discuss it as a group. Is this a tenet that we should have built into our engineering process? Is this something that everybody should be familiar with because it's part of what it means for our software to be complete? I like that. It was a good idea. Yes, go ahead.
So you talked about not forcing the teams to do pair programming, right? So how do we go about, kind of motivating them and, get it introduced to a team which has never done pair programming?
The question was about how do you motivate teams who have not paired to pair if you are not going to say mandate it or force it from, say, a top-down organizational structure? That's a great question. I think that there's multiple ways to do it. One way is to be given the freedom, like if you're a manager, to give freedom to your engineering teams to organize themselves how they feel like they should, or to use engineering practices that they feel are the best engineering practices. And if pairing is one of those, you might even say like, and if you want to pair program, that's great, you should do it. Sometimes just given that permission will spark something in a couple of people on those teams. Maybe you have a large team, but there's only a few people who want to, there might only be a couple of people who want to pair. Finding those people who want to pair, I guess is what I'm trying to say. You might have sort of champions, so to speak, motivated people who do want to try this. Maybe it's not everybody, but giving people the freedom, or people feeling like they have the freedom and the permission, so to speak, to try it and not be glared at or made fun of by management or their peers. Peer pressure is a big thing too. People saying like, oh, what are you guys doing over there? I guess they're pairing. Ha ha ha, giggle giggle. That peer pressure, if people feel like they have permission, but it's not socially accepted, then they might not do it then either. But I think, finding, if you're an engineer and you're motivated to do this, finding other people who want to do it too, even if it's just one, it doesn't have to be a whole organization, just like one other person. Hey, let's pair on this thing over here, that thing over there. You pair on I'll pair on your code and you pair on my code. That can get the ball rolling. It can get people interested. We at Labs, we've had multiple client engagements where we've gone into a client. Usually clients come to us. There have been times where we've gone on site to clients. It's rare, but it has happened. And sometimes we're at an organization that is, we'll just say, hostile to pairing. It's agreed that we'll do it, but the rest of the organization is like, all right, we're not doing that hippie thing, whatever. What I've found is sometimes the best technique is to just keep delivering. Is if you get results, then that trumps all. Am I allowed to say Trump anymore? That kind of beats everything. I've been in situations as well where the resistance was from management. And management's like, okay, well, I'm going to let you try it. Kind of like, I'm kind of reading into it, but it felt a bit like, the manager was going to give us enough rope to hang ourselves by, so to speak. When we failed, you'd be able to cite the fact that, we had failed, and I let them try. But I didn't really believe it. And then, not just because of us, I'm not saying like, oh, Labs is so awesome, we crush everything. But, with the client teams, inevitably, those pairing teams crush it because of all those benefits we talked about and more earlier. And then suddenly, once management gets results, all is forgiven. It's like, whatever you want to do. In sports, baseball, hockey, all those that count things like home runs or goals or what have you, there's a phrase, it's like, nobody asks how, they ask how many. It's like, I don't care how you do it, as long as it gets done. That is sometimes the tenet. So I might have drifted away from the message a little bit here, but I feel like that can be a way of doing it too. If the motivation is, again, more from management, but if your motivation is if you're, again, getting back to like, if it's about getting the team to get motivated, finding those champions inside the team is kind of the best way. You can try to mandate it from above. That I'm sure that's happened, and I'm sure it has worked in some situations. That is probably the most painful way to do it. If you have some, you need those, you need to sandwich the support. You need to have like management who's like, yes, go for it. And then people, grassroots people who are saying, great, thank you, I want to do it. Then you have that unity from top to bottom. If it's just a bunch of rebels, then you have to kill them with results, and that can be hard. And if it's just management forcing people from the bottom, then you may face like attrition and such. Other questions? I have no idea what time it is. I'm sure these people back here are going to wave at me eventually. All right, thank you.
I have a question about giving feedback to your peers. What are some good techniques for giving feedback that's like open and transparent without like hurting other people's feelings? I've tried pluses and deltas.
Mm-hmm.
That worked great. We had a couple pivots that were working with us, and they were encouraging everybody to do it in a really great way. But after they left, it kind of just went downhill. And the one thing that everybody kept in mind was like, if you don't have any deltas, don't do pluses, just because there's like no point kind of.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to know like what other sort of feedback systems.
Sure. If you don't mind, would you mind describing pluses and deltas to everybody? All right, thank you so much. And maybe introduce yourself as well.
Okay, sure.
Hey, I'm Travis. I work for Allstate Insurance. So we had a couple pivots come in, and they worked with us. And so one feedback system they had was pluses and deltas. Basically, what you do is after you pair for the day, you guys sit down, face each other, and just say, you know, what were some pluses? Like, hey, you did really awesome at this. Like, you know, I like that you speak everything you have in mind. Of like, you know, you mention, you know, you ask questions, stuff like that. And then also some deltas. Like, you know, I think you could take a little bit less time driving. You know, maybe switch a little bit more. Maybe suggesting doing ping pong pairing and things like that. And then obviously doing the sandwich method is always great, where you like start with pluses, go to deltas, and end with pluses. So for us, it kind of worked for a while, but I was just looking for other ways to do it.
Great, thank you. I don't know if anybody else wants to chime in. I feel like this is actually this is a tough one, and I like the pluses and deltas is what I was going to talk about, you know, giving feedback to your pair so you can both continuously improve. You know, I think it depends a lot on the culture of openness that you have. 1 minute. Okay, I think this is the last question. I think it depends a lot on the culture of openness that you have, and people's sort of willingness to be tolerance to honesty, which sounded sort of funny. I guess what I'm really trying to say is you always want any kind of feedback to be you know, kind and actionable and specific. But when you get down to it, like people are hard. You know, some people are sensitive, some people are brash. Some people are brash but actually very sensitive. Some people appear sensitive but are actually rock hard and can take any feedback. And it can be very hard to figure that out. So, you know, sometimes you can have that direct interaction. And I think, you know, we started the whole discussion with sort of people who are new to pairing and how do you sort of set up a little framework. You know, it can help to either at the beginning of a project or beginning of some mile marker to set up a little framework like that. Like, hey team, let's all try this thing. What do we think? Sure. And then you're all sort of level set versus just turning to your pair at the end of the day and saying like, hey, I'm going to give you a bunch of feedback right now. And that, whoa, surprise. I don't know if I have much more advice other than just being, you know, being kind and specific with the people that you're working with. You know, the plus deltas I think is probably the easiest thing to start with, and you can kind of build on that, sort of iterate on that. Is what I would say is, you know, if you're finding they're not working, try some little tweak in there, but always being kind and empathetic. And I think I'm out of time. All right, I think that's it. Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate it. Please, I think they said that if you registered for the talk on the app or the site, you could rate the talk. Please do. Please rate, like even if it's just one button, 5 stars, 0 stars. Especially if you didn't enjoy this. Don't make me do this to anybody else if this was not good. Pay it forward. Save everyone else. Thank you so much. And if you see me around, hit me up, ask me more questions.